Hey guys, welcome back to the channel for another Crystalized video. Today we're ranking all 30 episodes of Ninjago Season 15 from worst to best. Since there's so many episodes, I'll probably try to keep it brief and I won't spend too much time on each episode. Also, some of these rankings may be inconsistent with my previous ratings because my opinions in some ways have changed a lot. That's about all I have to say, let's begin. Return of the Ice Emperor is this season's worst episode. To me, it just felt really pointless and it wasn't very funny. They took this very serious concept from season 11 and dumbed it down into a joke. I also feel like Ronan's redemption in this season is just not very good. This episode has some nice Lloyd and Garmino stuff, but the rest is very forgettable. It feels weird to put the series finale this low, but Roots was just not a great episode. It was really rushed, and the handling of Ruby is downright awful. This is also a very low stakes finale, with very little consequences. However, I do feel it's a beautiful looking episode, and the conclusion to Garmino was solid. In the end, this episode leaves me feeling very unsatisfied. To me, episode 9 is definitely the worst of part 1. It felt very slow, and there just wasn't too much going on. Fugitive was really obnoxious and just way too in your face in this episode. Nya's role in this episode feels very secondary to the ninja, and that's a trend the rest of the season maintains. Dareth, however, is very fun, and the chase was decent. Distress Calls isn't a horribly disastrous episode, but it's just very boring. This episode features Racer 7 driving Cole across the city, and okay, I guess, it's whatever. A bigger issue is seeing Nya use her powers. Everything with her in this episode feels completely hollow and empty. Again, the Lloyd Garmino stuff was really strong here, but the rest of the episode is very bland. Now we take a slight step up to episode 23. I feel like the Wu stuff here was pretty good, and it was nice to see him regain his confidence. Wu's monologue is very similar to season 9, but still pretty good. The downside is seeing Nya regain her powers. Anything that involves that is pretty bad. This episode overall is good but not great. And now we have episode 25, Safe Haven. The start of this episode was pretty entertaining, and I enjoyed seeing Skylar and Pythor battle for a bit. Jake was a nice inclusion here, and the Lloyd Garmino stuff is very strong. The rest of the episode is pretty uneventful. Despite Skylar being a main character here, the episode just doesn't do too much with her, and I would have liked to see her character develop more. Next up we have episode 26, Compatible. Fake out deaths are a big problem in Crystalized. Honestly though, I enjoyed Pixel's monologue. It was very heartfelt and genuine, even though the story was predictable. I also appreciate that this episode has Kai and Skylar having real conversation about their relationship, and that they're not just this perfect couple. And now going back to part 1, episode 4 was pretty decent, and nicely kicked off Nya's return. I also like Asphira's return. It was a very natural way to bring back this character. And the high stuff in action was cool too. The introduction of the mayor is decent as well. And the following episode, episode 5, was a very fun watch. I really enjoyed seeing the ninja vehicles and the fight in the air. The new ninja are a very exciting presence, and it was also nice to see the old ninja up to typical ninja stealth stuff. This was a nice continuation of the story that episode 4 set up. Next up we have episode 7. The best part by far was the introduction to Kabuki Mask Ruby. It was a very unsettling and creepy scene, and the same can be said about the Vangelis recruitment scene. But the rest of this episode was decent too. I like how it places emphasis on Ninjago's government and court system, an aspect which wasn't focused on in season 6. In 20th place, we have episode 11, The Fifth Villain. The first part of this episode wasn't too special, but I like the second part, and the return to Ninjago City. I feel like the reintroduction of the mechanic was pretty good, and I love the setup for episode 12. This was a nice transition episode and had some really cool action. Next up we have episode 6, A Painful Promise, the end of this season's first arc. At the end of this episode has so much going on. Asphira joins the council, the ninja go to jail, Nya's back. This episode's end conveys a ton of different emotions, and I really love that. I also like the more lighthearted stuff between Wu and Asphira. Going back to part 2 for episode 21, A Lesson in Anger. This episode further explores OD form, and I like that this episode shows Lloyd and Garmino training together. The episode nicely establishes Lloyd's resistance to OD form, and this was a pretty good start to his story, even if I wasn't a fan of the end. And also, it was awesome to see the new ninja get crystallized. Basically, everyone saw that coming. And 2 episodes earlier was Catastrophe. This episode does a great job in showing the might and strength of the Vegestone army, and the action was very entertaining. I also liked the return of Garmino. Yeah, it was weird and unexpected, but I think somehow it worked. It was nice to see the Overlord as well. Here we have episode 3, The Shape of Nya. I like how this episode further explores the Vegestone mystery, and this episode starts the rivalry between the new and old ninja. I also like the emotion here, and how Kai and Jay have a bit of a conflict. although this conflict wasn't as deep as it could have been. And now halfway through our list, we have episode 17, The Coming of the King. This episode was an excellent showcase of the full council. It was also nice to see the Overlord collecting his strength, powering up the villains, and activating his army. And the ending of this episode was very unexpected and set up an interesting story for episode 18. And speaking of that episode, this was an interesting parallel to season 8, episode 80, except the dynamic has totally changed. The episode is a nice affirmation of what Lloyd and Ruby's characters are all about. And this was definitely one of her better episodes in Crystalized. It was also nice to see Wu finally okay with breaking the law. Episode 28 officially starts the season's final battle, and I like that we got to see the Council and the Overlord together again. I especially enjoyed the end of this episode, and it was really exciting to see the fight begin. And the exploration into Dragonform was cool too, very reminiscent of early Ninjago. And now we have episode 20, Garmadon's flashback episode. This was a nice transition between season 10 and season 15, but for dedicated fans, it works nicely with the comics. I've praised Christofern a lot. I feel like it's a really effective metaphor and works very well here. My only issue here is plot holes, but overall, the episode has a really nice story to tell. Next up, we have episode 16, Darkness Within. The Overlord's return was perfect. It was an incredible scene that felt super climactic. I also enjoyed seeing the golden weapons get corrupted, as well as interactions between the original four. But again, the highlight was definitely the Overlord. Going a few episodes back to episode 14, the start of owning Lloyd is really interesting, and it's this idea that was never really explored in the owning trilogy, but it's very cool to see here. They also lead into Ruby's cartoony side here, which I feel like it works. And the spider chase scene had a great atmosphere, and it was very tense. You might be surprised to see this episode so high, but I just really love it. It's such a fun watch. Pythor is the star here. He is introduced perfectly after 6 years. They just capture his personality and charm so well. I also love his prison escape scene with a wonderful piece of music to accompany it. This isn't the most significant episode ever, but seeing Pythor back for the first time since Day of the Departed is just awesome. In 8th place, we have episode 15, The Fall of the Monastery. This season does this plot point really well and makes it feel very emotional. It shows how powerful and awesome Wu is as a character, and it was really fun to see the council working together at full strength as well. This episode has grown on me a ton. I really love the theme of action versus inaction, and it was a great way for Nya's return to start. I also enjoyed Nya's role here as a mentor character. My only issue is it was too easy for Nya to get her memories back, but I can forgive that. This episode was very strong thematically. Ninjago has done the fractured team story 3 times now, and each time it manages to be different. I really love the portrayal of grief here, especially Lloyd and Jay. But this episode also advances the plot in interesting ways, by showing the Vegestone story, and also the new ninja. It's a great premiere that wonderfully establishes the post-Seabound Ninjago. Entering the final 5, we have episode 29, Dragonform. Despite Ruby's redemption, I still really enjoyed this episode. Dragonform was just very fun to see, and made for some pretty exciting fights. My favorite part was the reveal that the Overlord made the Great Devourer. This is an excellent addition to the lore, and a great way to add context to Season 2. In 4th place, we have episode 22, Brave But Foolish. This episode features the best fight of the season, with Wu versus the Crystal King. A great showdown between these two ancient masters. I also love the characterization of Garmadon here, and his desire for forgiveness. And the rest of the action in this episode with the Dragonites and owning Garmadon, all of it is just so exciting to watch. Really an awesome episode. In 3rd place, we have episode 10, The Benefit of Grief. This episode is a great mini-arc, and relates really nicely to Zane's character. I love the way in which Sally and Zane's characters are linked, and how Zane is able to learn from her experiences. The message about emotion is really strong, and how all emotions are useful in some way. This episode is very impactful, and in 11 minutes, it made me care about a character we had just met. The runner-up spot goes to episode 13, A Sinister Shadow. This was a very strong start for Ruby's return, and explained her motivations really effectively. I like how this episode shows Ruby at past events, such as meeting with Vangelis and the Seabound premiere. The Overlord was also really cool and had some great dialogue. However, there was one better episode. The best episode of Ninjago Crystalized is episode 12, The Council of the Crystal King. This episode was the fantastic culmination to the mystery the season had been building up. And Ruby's reveal was really cool too. I liked the decision to divide the season here, and I felt like it was a very powerful ending to leave the viewer with. There's also some nice action, and I enjoyed seeing the council members interact for the first time. This episode captures the best parts of part 1. The mysterious atmosphere, the villains, the kabuki mask. It's a great mid-season finale. Thank you all so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed, Please leave a like, subscribe, share with anyone ever you know. Share your favorite and least favorite episodes of Crystalized below, and I'll see you guys next time.